A few weeks ago, it was the 72nd anniversary of the death of a Christian sporting legend and childhood hero of mine, Eric Liddell, fondly known as the Flying Scotsman. Eric was famously known for his success at the 1924 Olympic Games in Paris, and his story was brought to the big screen by the Oscar-winning film Chariots of Fire. Eric was more than a sportsman, because his entire life was dedicated to the Lord, and after his Olympic success, he would return to China as a missionary to follow in the footsteps of his parents. Tragically, he would die in a Japanese prison or war camp in the last few months before the end of the Second World War. Eric Liddell's story begins in China, as he was born to Scottish missionary parents on the 16th of January 1902 in Tetsin, northern China. In 1908, Eric was only 6 when his parents sent him and his older brother to Britain to attend the Eltham College in Blackheath, a boarding school for children of missionaries. It would have been difficult for Eric growing up without his parents, who were working as missionaries in China. Eric, during his childhood, would only see his parents, his sister, and younger brother a few times at the family home in Edinburgh. Eric, in 1920, joined his older brother Robert at Edinburgh University, where he started his BSc, Pure Science degree course. It was at university that the young Eric would excel at sport, and he would represent Edinburgh University in athletics in the 100 metres and 200 metres respectively. He would go on and compete for Scotland. He was also a fine rugby player and would later go on to play 7 internationals for Scotland. He gave up playing rugby, deciding to specialise in running, with his ambition of reaching the 1924 Olympic Games in Paris. He became known as the fastest runner in Scotland, and his athletic achievements would be reported in the newspapers that raised expectation that he could be an Olympic champion. Glasgow Students' Evangelistic Union approached Eric to speak at their meetings because he was a deeply committed Christian, and his fame would attract large crowds to hear Eric share the gospel. Eric Liddell's main rival to win the Olympic gold at the 1924 Paris Olympics was Harold Abrahams, who was Jewish and was the son of immigrants from Lithuania, and his father was a successful financier. Harold attended Cambridge University, where he faced anti-Semitism, and it was these experiences that would be the driving force in his life. He wanted to prove to his peers that he was going to be the best. A year before the Paris Olympics, in 1923 at Stamford Bridge in London, now the home to Chelsea Football Club, that Eric and Harold Abrahams would compete against each other for the first time in the 100 metres. Eric was the winner that day, with his unorthodox running style beating Harold by 4 metres, and that defeat hurt Abrahams. Abrahams, after this defeat, hired a professional coach in Sam Musabini to help him to achieve Olympic glory. In the 1920s, sport was still very much an amateur pursuit, and by hiring a professional coach, he was looked down upon by the establishment of Cambridge University. Harold Abrahams would be looking for revenge against Eric Liddell in the 100 metres race at the Paris Olympics. He would also be up against the Olympic favourites, the Americans Charlie Paddock, the Olympic champion, who was looking to defend his title, and Jackson Schultz, nicknamed the New York Thunderbolt. It was Eric Liddell's deep Christian faith and convictions that would prevent him from competing for the Olympic gold in 100 metres against his main British rival, Harold Abrahams. Eric was the nation's favourite to win gold for Britain, but when Eric found out that the heats for the 100 metres were to be held on a Sunday, he went with his conscience and pulled out the event. Eric did this because he strongly believed that Sunday was God's day of rest and he would not compete. Eric Liddell's decision not to run on Sunday created an angry backlash in the British press, with headlines like "Liddell puts God before king and country." Huge amounts of pressure were placed upon Eric to reverse his decision, but he refused, deciding to stand firm in faith and fearing God rather than man. Eric would go to the Paris Olympics and would compete in the 200 metres and in the 400 metres, in which he was not expected to do well. Eric would win bronze in the 200 metres final, behind the winner, Jackson Schultz and Charlie Paddock. Harold Abrahams would compete in the final of the 100 metres without his nemesis, Eric Liddell, but to win gold for Britain, he would first have to beat Jackson Schultz and Charlie Paddock, the favoured Americans. This would be Harold's chance for glory and his opportunity to vanish the anti-Semitic prejudice he faced while at university. The professional training that Abrahams had gained under his coach Sam Masabini had paid off as he beat the Americans to win gold for Britain. Harold Abrahams would return to Britain and Cambridge University as an Olympic champion. He would also bring honour to the Jewish community in Britain. On Friday, the 11th of July, 1924 was the final of the 400 metres, in which Eric Liddell would compete for Great Britain. In the heats, Eric had qualified for the final, but was not expected to win gold, as this was not his favoured event.
It says in the old book, "He that honours me, I will honour." I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure.
Against all odds, Eric won gold for Britain and broke the Olympic and world record in the process. The Lord honoured Eric that day in the final for the stand that he made for him, because he was not seeking his own glory, but God's glory. He demonstrated his strong faith in the Lord by not competing on Sundays, and God rewarded him with a gold medal and a world record. Eric said of his success in winning gold, "The secret of my success over the 400 metres is that I run the first 200 metres as hard as I can. For the second 200 metres, with God's help, I run harder." The Scottish newspaper reported Eric Liddell's success in the following way. "The Union Jack flew in proud majesty over Columbus Stadium today, the 400 metres, which resulted in a great victory for Great Britain. The brilliant running of E.H. Liddell, the Edinburgh University sprinter, was responsible." There was a gasp of astonishment when Eric Liddell, one of the most popular athletes at Columbus, was seen to be a clear 3 yards in head of the field at half the distance. Nearing the tape, Finch and Butler strained every nerve and muscle to overtake him, but could make absolutely no impression on the inspired Scot. With 20 yards to go, Finch seems to gain a fraction, but Liddell appeared to sense the American, and with his head back and his chin thrust out in his usual style, he flashed past the tape to gain what was probably the greatest victory of the meeting so far. Certainly there has not been a more popular win. The crowd went into a frenzy of enthusiasm when it was announced on the loudspeaker that once again the world record had been gone by the board. This remarkable achievement confirms the view that the quarter mile is Liddell's best distance. Eric would later say, following this success at the Paris Olympics, "It has been a wonderful experience to compete in the Olympic Games and to bring home a gold medal. But since I've been a young lad, I have had my eyes on a different prize. You see, each one of us is in a greater race than any I've run in Paris, and this race ends when God gives out the medals." A year after his Olympic success, Eric in 1925 will return to northern China as a missionary to follow in the footsteps of his parents. China became a very dangerous place in 1931 when the Japanese invaded. In 1943, Eric was interned as a Japanese prisoner of war, and the conditions in the camp were awful, that included hard labour and with few provisions. Eric suffered a brain tumour and died on the 21st of February 1945, 5 months before liberation. The life of Eric Liddell was a huge inspiration in my life as a young teenager, as I was a keen runner representing my school in cross country and once representing the county of Dorset. I was so inspired by Eric Liddell's autobiography that I decided I would not run or compete on Sundays. I faced some ridicule at school for my stance in putting God first, but it taught me from a young age only to fear God and not man. Eric's story also helped me to make a stand for God, to stand up for his principles at school. even though I was 2 years academically behind the rest of my peers. But running gave me notoriety, even though it was difficult to be a Christian in the late 1980s. I still draw inspiration from the life of Eric Liddell, and when I watch one of my favourite films, Chariots of Fire, I still swell up with emotion. Eric achieved success in his life because he always put the Lord first, and he surrendered his life to Jesus in his entirety. He refused to compromise, and rather than please man, he served God. I believe that is why the Lord honoured him with gold in the Paris Olympics in 1924. I believe that today, God is looking for young men and women who are willing to abandon their lives over to Jesus completely and surrender their lives to him so that he can use their lives as his amazing testimony in this dying world, just as Eric Liddell did in his day.